So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we are continuing our discussion on mutual funds. So we have to talk about the debt mutual funds, and we were talking about the features of debt fund. So when we talk about the features of debt fund, it says a debt portfolio is made up of various types of debt securities, as we talked about. You can have the money market instruments. So now the question arises, what do we mean by the money market instruments? So money market instruments are the short-term instruments which are either issued by the government, be it your T-bills, like which have a maturity of like up to 1 year, be it 91 days T-bills, 182 days T-bill, or 364 days T-bill. And on the others, and you might have some certificate of deposits or commercial papers, like which are short term and have a maturity of more than 1 year, like the money market instruments or the primary instruments as we call them. And these are basically issued for the supplying the working capital needs of the company. Okay, and then you have the long term securities such as the corporate bonds, as we talked about. And from the corporate bonds, then you have the securitized assets and the government securities. So what is government securities we talked about, and now what is the securitized assets? By securitized assets is something we mean which are like converted into assets. Like for example, like you might have heard about the 2008 global crisis when the real estate market crashed. So what basically happened at that time? A company A, like for example, if a company has given loans to people for the construction of their houses or buying their houses. So these loans were mortgaged into security. That is, the loans were bundled. Like for example, if I am a company and I have given loans to someone to construct their houses or make their houses or like to buy their houses basically. So all those loans that I have given now, तो जो भी मैंने लोन दिए हैं, all those amount were converted into the securities and मतलब कि bundled together, and those securities were sold in the open market to general public. Okay, and how did I get money? Because those securities were ultimately like a bonds or a collateralized instruments, and that we call as securitized assets. And if I have like bundled those securities and that is being sold in the market, though I would be getting the money. Okay, so I got my money for the home loan. Okay, so I am secure. But how those people who have bought these securitized assets or the collateralized bond instruments or debt securities, how would they get money? Like they would get money when the people who have taken the loans from me, like they would be paying me the EMI, the principal component and the interest component. And from that amount, I would be giving them the rate of interest on those bonds and securities. So that we call it as a securitized assets. But the problem that happened was earlier the loans were given to the prime borrowers who had a credit score, who have a credit score of at least more than 700 or like 750, and those people were able to pay back the loans. But as a matter of greed and all, the loans were also given to subprime borrowers as well, who were the below the prime borrowers who defaulted in the payment. And once they defaulted in the payment, the interest rate also rose, and that created a further problem. So that was a result when this global recession or the 2008 crisis happened. And obviously, if I am a company and like I am giving loans, so I won't be giving directly to the people those collateralized bond securities or collateralized debt obligations or securitized assets. There will be an SPV involved, and that SPV is called a special purpose vehicle, and that's an entity of the company only. So that basically, I will sell all my loans to that SPV, which is a shell company of my company. So that will be like bundling all the home loans. So once I sell it to the SPV like would be giving me the money, and that would ultimately be sold to the public. और जो public जो पैसा देगी वो bonds खरीदने का वो SPV को मिल जाएगा. Okay, and ultimately the SPV would be getting the rate of interest from the home loans. So at least from my book, I would be able to remove the home loans, and they would be मतलब कि less NPAs or no NPAs. So that is a benefit for my company also. And what like really happened, like there was an insurance company also like involved in between, which formed a credit default swap. So what's a credit default swap? Like just in case if the home loaners are not able to pay me back the interest payment, so that can create a problem for the people who have invested into the securitized assets or bond instruments. So in that case, I would be paying a certain premium to to that insurance company. And just in case if the bonds default or the home loaners are not able to pay me back the money, the interest will be paid back by that insurance company to the SPV, and the security purpose vehicle would be paying it back to the people who have bought the securities. But ultimately the problem rose so much कि इतने false claims आ गए हैं, and मतलब इतने सब borrowers को दे दिया कि the premium was also like not enough to pay, and that created the further problem. ठीक है. And further say that debt securities can be classified on the basis of the issuer, such as government, bank, and corporates, as we talked about. And debt fund segmentation we have talked about can be in terms of the tenure, short, medium, long tenure funds, or on the basis of the interest rate risk, as low, medium, high interest rate volatility funds. And I told you that when there is high volatility, so like which funds to invest in, either the fixed maturity plans or the target maturity plans. If the interest rate are expected to rise in future, then invest in short-term bonds. If the interest rate are expected to like decline, then invest in long-term bonds or directly invest in a dynamic bond fund like which will take care of everything. Okay. Then you have the hybrid fund. So hybrid funds is a combination of both debt and equity instruments. And further, we can have the 6 types of hybrid funds, as like we'll talk in the next. So hybrid fund, basically, I told you that they are meant for the risk neutral people that who want both the capital preservation and a fixed income in the form of dividend or interest, because the equity instruments would be paying the dividend and the debt instruments would be paying the interest payment. And also they want to combine this with the capital appreciation and growth. And if they want it, they can have it in the form of a hybrid fund. Now there are like 6 types of hybrid fund. See, one, you have the balance advantage or the dynamic asset allocation fund. You have the aggressive hybrid fund. You have a conservative hybrid fund. You have a multi-asset allocation fund. You have equity savings fund. You have the arbitrage fund. So what is basically happening in an aggressive fund? At least 65% of the amount is going towards equity. See, at least 65 to 80% of the amount is going into equity because it is a risky one and an aggressive fund. In a conservative fund, at least 60 to 70% is going into bond instruments because you have a lesser risk appetite. In case of a balanced fund, a 60-40 ratio is being maintained. Okay, but you're done, and that's a hybrid fund. Okay, then you have like the multi-asset allocation fund. So what happens in a multi-asset allocation fund? The amount is being divided into what debt, equity, and gold. Then the equity saving fund has at least like 65% into equity, and the arbitrage fund is something which allows you like buying and selling in different markets. See, I mentioned the conservative funds, balanced hybrid funds, aggressive funds, solution, then the closed-end hybrid funds. All these are mentioned here. And they mentioned some closed-ended hybrid funds also, like the capital protection funds. That is, if you want to maintain your capital and do not want to lose in the market. Then the solution-oriented fund. Those solution-oriented fund can be in terms of the retirement fund and children fund. Like for example, if you want some money for retirement, or like a children want some money, so that can be the case of the retirement fund or the children's fund. That is one thing. So like when I was talking about the arbitrage fund, so by the arbitrage fund I meant, for example, you can take the advantage of the imperfections in the market. Like if like one market is cheap and the other market is high, then you can buy from the cheap market and sell in the high market. And that happens basically in the field of derivatives and all those things. Then you have the international funds. So in the case of the international funds, you are like eligible to invest outside India. Like for example, if you live in India, and you can invest into the stocks of Google, you can invest into Microsoft, you can invest into Apple, Facebook, and all these companies you can invest into. So either you people can invest by picking the direct stocks because we have certain apps for that. For example, the Indie Money and all that, or you can invest through mutual funds. And the other way is through the ADRs and GDRs. So by the ADR, I mean we call it as the American Depository Receipt. So what happens in the case of the American Depository Receipt, that trades on the American Stock Exchange, and the Americans can invest into the countries outside America. But in case of a global depository receipt, what basically happens, these are being traded over the stock exchanges of every country. And when GDR, it represents one share of a foreign company. And you can buy those GDRs and trade the shares of the foreign company. But what are the advantages of investing into international funds? The biggest advantage is you have of excessive diversification. Over the time, the dollar has increased as compared to the rupee. So that is like one more benefit. And that we call as a foreign exchange translation reserve. The foreign exchange translation the benefit mil jayega. That is one thing that you should know. Okay, so like these are like some of the benefits. And even in the case of international funds, the people can buy the funds in fractions, like, which is not possible in India, right?